How to make 1,000 mockups with 2 clicks in Photoshop. That is quite literally what I'm going to be showing you how to do here in this video. I have 100 artwork images in this folder here, and I have 10 different mockup scenes that I'm using to create mockup images for. To make 1,000 mockups with 2 clicks in Photoshop, all you have to do is click here and click here. This operation is completely finished. Let's take a look at our folder here. As you can see, we have 1,000 images that were created for our 10 different mockup templates and the 100 different artwork images. This was a completely automated process. This happened on autopilot. I wasn't sitting there doing this boring work myself. Photoshop just automatically generated all 1,000 mockup images for me. Now you can imagine if I was doing this manually, individually coming into Photoshop and creating all these mockup images one at a time, this would probably take me an entire day, maybe an entire weekend. I would have to come in here, I would have to step into the smart object, I would have to take this, I would have to paste it in here, flatten the image, save it, come over here, cool, this is ready, then I would go File, Export, Quick Export, type the file name, blah, 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 just to create one out of my 1,000 mockup images. Maybe if I was exceptionally fast, I could create one every 30 seconds, let's say 30 times 1,000, that's 30,000 seconds divided by 60 seconds in a minute. That would take me about 8 hours of work right there. Instead, I was able to come here, click 2 buttons, and I generated all my required mockups, automatically producing enormous time savings on a repetitive, boring part of my workflow. So how does this work exactly? This is a Photoshop plugin called Batch Replace Smart Objects. This is basically a Photoshop add-on that you can install through the official Adobe Exchange. You can find a link in the description of this video, you can check the comments as well. And what this plugin basically allows you to do is automate the creation of mockup images using PSD files that contain a smart object layer, which corresponds to your artwork images. I'm going to show you how it works. I'm going to show you how to set up and save your operations. You can use it to create mockups for individual files, or you can do what I did previously and set up an entire folder of PSD files to use, to where once your operations are saved, you can just come here, run the saved operations, and completely automate your entire mockup creation workflow. So the plugin basically detects the smart object layer in your mockup scene. If it's a simple scene like this one where there's just one smart object layer, you could just select your Photoshop document to use. So we're going to go and select one of these. That's the PSD file, that's our mockup template. Then you would specify the input folder to use. That's going to be the folder of the artwork images to use to actually replace the smart object content. So we'll just go here, input folder to use, I'll select this one here. Now a cool feature about this plugin, it can actually stretch all of your images to perfectly fit the smart object layer. This is useful if you know there's going to be some variance in your input folder images. Maybe the images are sized differently or the aspect ratios are slightly different. If you leave this checked, it'll basically make it so even if the images are a different size, they'll always match the mockup scene perfectly. You're not going to have any overspill, like if you came here, tried to do this manually with a 3x4 image that doesn't size correctly. You're not going to have any issues with that if you have this checkbox enabled, because it'll automatically resize all of the images for you. And then output folder to use, you would just specify this is where I want my final mockup images to get saved to. So we're going to go back over here. I'm going to do this other folder, final mockup images, and it basically will just run your specified operation. So using this particular Photoshop document for each one of the artwork images in the input folder, it's going to first resize them to perfectly fit the mockup scene, then it'll replace the smart object with whatever artwork image it's on, and finally it'll export the final updated mockup image to your specified output folder. You can export in PNG or JPEG file type. You can also customize the save quality and compression level. So if you want a large amount of compression applied for lower file sizes, you can go towards the lower end of the spectrum, or if you're going for the maximum possible image quality, you can go towards the higher end of the spectrum. That's really it. You just set up your operation, click run this now, or alternatively you can save the operation to run later via the batches tab, or you can even set up multiple step workflows, which is basically where you can chain together individual operations to where step 1 will run first and then it'll complete that, step 2 will run next, it'll complete that, and so forth for however many steps you have in your workflow. So we'll save this one here so we can reference it later. I'm just going to say room mockup images 1, save, that'll show up in the batches tab. You can also just run it here in real time, which is exactly what we're going to do right now. So because we have this checkbox enabled, there's a little intermediate step where it opens the current image that it's on, performs the resize operation, and then it drops it inside the mockup scene and exports the mockup image accordingly. All of this is automated. I'm not sitting here doing this myself. The plugin is doing all the work for me. This operation is completely finished. We'll go ahead and pop over to this folder here, and here we have our 30 images that it just exported for us. So that's using the basic point to just one particular Photoshop mode, and we saved our individual operation earlier, so if you wanted, you can just come here to your batches tab, click run batch, and it'll just run your specified operation with all of your settings and folders and everything. It'll basically just retain that and use that for the operation. There's another mode you can use, and that's where you actually toggle this to select an entire folder of PSD files to use. That's what we did in our first operation, where instead of just selecting, hey, use this one individual Photoshop document, if you're using a large number of PSD files and you don't want to individually set them up as separate steps, you can just toggle this mode, point to the entire folder. What that will allow you to do is it'll basically start with this first one, it'll complete the operation, it'll move on to the next one, complete the operation, and so forth, generating all the mockup images on autopilot, basically one after the other for all of the PSD files in your specified folder. Everything else is really the same. Input folder, you would just point to your specified artwork images. You could come here, do it like this. Output folder, where do you want to save your images to? You could come here, select that, set up your save settings and everything, and then once again, you can run this now. You can save the operation, make all 10 mockup scenes, save like that, and then alternatively, you could set up the workflow, which is where you could just give your workflow a name, make all of my mockup images. That's the name for the workflow. And then step one, each step just corresponds to one saved operation. So we can say use PSD folder 1. Maybe we could do it like that. Then step 2, maybe you have a different folder that you're using with a completely different set of mockups. So you could say folder of PSD files number 2. You could save it like this, use PSD folder number 2 instead. Blah, 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 however many steps you need. You can basically chain together the steps, and you can also save your steps in different modes. So maybe your step 1 is using an entire folder. Maybe step 2, you're just using one particular Photoshop document. Doesn't really matter. The plugin's pretty flexible. Whatever you set up here, it'll just save that particular step and all the settings for whatever workflow step it's on. And then to run the workflows, you just come here to your tab, and it just has them saved here. Make all of my mockup images. Step 1, use folder 1. Step 2, use folder 2, and so forth. Similar to the batches tab, you would just come here, click the run button, and it would just automate that process, starting with step 1, moving on to step 2, and so forth. Completely automated, 100% on autopilot. Now, in terms of setting up your mockup templates, if you have a file that has multiple different smart object layers, you want to make sure that your target smart object layer is selected and highlighted in the layer stack, because otherwise, if you try to run the operation, the plugin gets confused and it basically says, hey, there's multiple smart objects, but none of them are selected. Please select the one you want us to perform the automated mockup creation operation on. So you would just have to come here like this, and then what that would allow you to do is run the operation, and it would proceed accordingly. Now, if there's only one smart object layer, you don't have to worry about highlighting anything, because the plugin knows, hey, there's one single smart object layer, and it will just automatically use that one. If there's multiple, however, you just want to make sure your target layer is selected. If you have a scene where, for whatever reason, maybe you are trying to create 2 different mockups, maybe it's like you're a logo designer and you have different logos or whatever. If you want to perform the operation using multiple smart objects, you can select several different layers in one scene, and basically whatever image it's on from the current folder, it'll perform the replacement operation using both of the smart objects as long as both are selected. We'll pop over real quick. As you can see, because we had both smart object layers selected, it did successfully perform the automated operation using both of the smart objects for the current image that it was on. Anyway, super useful plugin, batch replace smart objects. Like I said, you can find a link in the description or comment section. Instead of wasting hours of time doing the boring, tedious, repetitive work of creating your mockups one at a time, you can just come here, click this button, click that button, automate the creation of 1,000 mockup images with 2 clicks in Photoshop. Hope you found this helpful. Make sure to drop a like and comment to keep our YouTube overlords satisfied. Thank you guys for watching, and see you later.